Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Technique Tuesday. My name is Ali Board, and just in case you don't know the drill of what all of these things are about, almost every Tuesday, I try to do a live broadcast from my studio down here on the south coast of England in the beautiful county of Dorset to bring you something that I'm experimenting with or a subject matter that I'm thinking about at the moment. And then if you are live with me on Facebook, we kind of have a bit of a chat, don't we? And if you are watching on catch up either via YouTube or my blog, then you usually send me messages, all of which I absolutely love. Now I do have an apology to make for last week. I know I don't need to apologise, and I know that you all said to me, don't worry about it. It was too hot in this studio. It was about 40 degrees in the studio. So I thought, do you know what? As much as I love you all, not willing to melt under all the lights for that. It's still pretty toasty in here this morning, I have to say, but it's pleasantly cool outside. Now, if you do tend to watch live, then one of the things that I really like to do is to give you a shout out. So in the comments in the chat on Facebook, let me know where you're watching from. I apologise in advance. I'm saying sorry for everything this morning, aren't I? I apologise in advance if I don't see your comments. Sometimes they flick by a little bit too fast. I try to say hello to as many people as possible. So let me just, I'm looking down because I'm having a look to see who's in the room. Heather is a good morning, Heather. Heather gets award of the day for being the first person to comment. Sue, good morning. Pam, good morning. Who else have we got? Barbara, Maureen, Linda P, Alice. Oh, Alice is saying it's wet in the northeast of Scotland. Don't you love the weather reports for Technique Tuesday? Anne, Rubina, good morning, lovely. Patricia is saying whoop whoop. Mr. Templeman, good morning. Sup, I will see you in a couple of days. Chris, Linda. Yes, lots of people are saying that they've got poor signal this morning. I think that as far as the UK is concerned, it's poor signal everywhere at the moment, isn't it? Martina, Jeanette, Sandy, Ali D is watching me from the comfort of her own duvet. Good morning. Thyra, good morning. Val, who else we got? Oh, they are popping up. Christine, Thea, Viv, good morning. Trisha, lots of people around. Trudy, Jane and Joe from my good old hometown of Wimborne Minster in Dorset. No matter how you are watching, if you're watching on catch up, thank you very much for taking the time to tune in. Now, what have we been working on? Good morning, Sheena. We have been working on a fungi painting because at the beginning of this month, that's July 2022, I launched the New Look All Aboard Artist subscription, my membership page, my art group, my online art community that is going from strength to strength, I have to say. And this month's theme is called In the Garden. I've been using my newly found gardening skills as inspiration, and let me show you the piece of reference material that I've been using for this painting. This is it. It's a photograph that I found on Unsplash, and if you have a look back both in the comments and on the blog on the Learning to Paint website, you will find a link to that photograph if you would like to have a go too. It's quite a complicated photograph. It looks quite simple, but those of you who've had a go at it will absolutely know that it's a bit deceptive. Lots of textures going on. Now, if we switch to the overhead camera, this is where I got it to a couple of weeks ago. We were experimenting with all sorts of things in terms of the texture. We used wool and we used needle felting wool. We used some skeleton leaves. We laid them down. We put textures all over the top. And then, excuse me, a couple of weeks ago, we dropped the colours in the background and in the foreground. Now, the chances are today in the broadcast, I'm not going to get to paint all of these in today. What I thought I would do is just pick a few out to demonstrate to you how I might go about painting them in. Now, you would think, wouldn't you, that this was a nice, easy thing to paint, but they're not. Toadstools, fungi and the like are deceptively tricky to get the better of because they're such a simple shape. And you can make them look very, very flat if you're not careful. So we need to be really careful about how we apply that colour, where we apply the colour. And the other thing that we're going to need to be very careful about is to not lose our tonal values. So we've got some nice meaty old darks in here, haven't we? We've got some nice textures going on here. These need to be much smoother in the way that we apply the paint. But if I go in with too much colour, I'm going to be in trouble because I'm going to have a mismatch of tone between my darks, some of my paler areas and my lights. So we've got to be really careful. Good morning, Gwen. So what have I got at kind of around, you know me, you know the way I work by now. I have all my stuff around me so that I can pick and mix my way through the materials to see what it is that I need. So I'm going to pop my painting to one side just for a second, and I'm going to show you the 2 bits of kit that I've got here, plus one more for painting in these toadstools. Anita, SAA's resident artist, Anita Pounder is in the room. Thank you very much for tuning in. Hello, my lovely. I will see you in a couple of days as well. So I've got 2 tins here. This is my watercolour tin, and this is one of my gouache tins. You'll see why in a second. If you followed along with my Dorset Art Week's broadcast, then you'll know all about this one. Here is my watercolour box, my palette, where I squeeze my watercolour tube paints out into empty pans. You can see they lift out. And I do it in this way so that I can pick and mix my way through my colour palette. I can alter my box depending on where I am or what it is that I'm painting. This is kind of my standard set of colours, really. I've got a couple of anomalies in there at the moment because I've been working on other workshops, but that's my kind of set of standard colours. Then over here, looks the same but wildly different. This is my gouache box. And you'll see straight away why it's different. A, it's got a lot more colours in it. And B, it's got values of the same colour. So we've got a few kind of, this is the type of paint that I usually use for my illustration work. So take these, for example. With gouache, which is a very opaque medium, rather than taking some of it and thinning it out with water, I don't want it to go see-through, I want it to be a nice flat colour. So what I do is I make up values of the same colour by adding a little more white to them all the time. And then rather than throwing them away or having to keep my palette, because I usually have to have quite big gaps between my illustration work because my fine art work takes over. Good morning, Helen. Christine, good morning as well. Yes, Christine is saying my internet is rubbish. So yeah, I think everybody is struggling with the internet at the moment. I'm glad to say it's stable here at the moment. I've got my little counter going in the corner. It's all fine at the moment. Because I have to take breaks between my illustration work and my fine art work, I have to make sure that I've got exactly the right colours when I go back to them. So I save them in this way, and then I don't have to keep mixing them all the time. So I've kind of got a selection of things in there. I didn't necessarily mix them up ready for fungi this morning. What I did was find one of my tins, because I have 2 or 3 of these. Then I sort of picked the ones that were most applicable. Now Anne is asking a question. She said, good morning Anne. Do your watercolour paints in the pans remain usable for months? I have colours I don't use often. Yes, absolutely. If you buy quality watercolours, and by quality watercolours I mean artist quality watercolours, they have the makeup of them is such that you don't really need to do a lot to reconstitute them. So a good old spritz with a spray bottle and they should be fine. My main holding box has, well, I'm not over exaggerating when I say there are hundreds in there. And so I will just go back, I will give them a bit of a spritz, and they will come back to life. It's not a problem. Who else have I missed? Good morning, Joe. Good morning, Julie. So I've got my colours there. I'm going to stick those over to one side, and I'm going to bring my painting back in. Now, I've got some brushes here. You'll not be surprised to see that these are the SAA's Imitation Sable brushes. These are the brushes that I have used pretty much exclusively for the last 4 or 5 years. I'm horrible to them. They stand up to me being horrible to them very, very well. I've got small sizes here. Those of you who know my work well won't think, crikey, she's got her size 2 out. But actually, I've been doing a lot of detailing. doodling at the moment. I've sort of, my work has kind of, diverted into doing some smaller stuff, I have to say. Who else have we got? Oh, we've got some lovely people in the room. We've got Nuala, good morning. We've got Urs, good morning, my lovely. And we've got Carol as well in the room. Good morning to all of you. So yeah, kind of scaling down a little bit. Who knew that that was a thing? And I've got my pot of water, my good old trusty water pot, got a bit of kitchen roll, and I have a Posca pen here as well, just in case I need it. One of those acrylic paint markers. I haven't decided whether I do need that yet. I have a feeling that I do, but it's there. I'll talk more about that when I use it. So what I'm going to concentrate on today is this little selection of fungi that are just here. I'm going to paint a couple of them in for you so that you can see exactly how I might progress and work my way through it. Now the colours for our reference material, and let's show you that reference material again. The colours are tricky monsters because you've got that real pale kind of buffy kind of colour with a colour at the top of it that can't really decide what it is. Is it orange? Is it brown? Is it red? All sorts of things going on. So one of the first things I am going to do is I'm going to try and mix those colours up. So again, let's get rid of the painting. Let's get my gouache box in and we'll see if we can make a decent job of mixing up those colours. Now again, if I was working on more of a fine art project, I'd be using the colour straight out of the pan, I'd be picking it up off the colour and I'd be throwing it at the surface. But this is a sort of combination, isn't it? It's a combination between fine art, so that kind of interpretive, watercolour, textural, wishy-washy kind of background, and the need for a little bit of detail, so it crosses those boundaries. And you know I love a boundary crossing. I love those kind of areas of art where then can't be really classed as fine art, they can't be really classed as illustration, or they dip their toe into craft or calligraphy or bookbinding or all of those kind of sorts of things. So this is kind of my happy place, really. This is a spot that I like to occupy where I'm drawing in from different disciplines. Okay, so let's go with the number 6 brush and let's bring my water pot somewhere closer so I don't have to reach across. And let's see what we've got. Now I've got a kind of, what I think is probably yellow ochre. I don't label my pans in the same way that I label my watercolour pans because the gouache mixes that I tend to mix up tend to be by eye rather than anything else. I don't overly worry about that kind of thing. Then we've got, let's go for some zinc white over here, which I've just made yellow because I didn't wash my brush out properly. Never mind, not the end of the world. And let's start mixing that together to see if I can get anywhere close to that toadstool colour. Now it's a bit on the yellow side, so I think we're going to need to add some brown into it to get it to soften a little bit. So let's chuck a little bit of brown in there. Now this is colour mixing that I don't normally do. I don't usually throw all kinds of colour at it. That's better, but probably still not pale enough. Let's do a little bit more. I thought I would do this with you this morning because I thought it would be interesting to see, because I know some people really struggle with colour mixing, really struggle with it. So I thought this might be helpful. That's better. Let's have a look at that reference material again. That's getting somewhere close to it, but it's still on the yellow side a little bit. So shall we be daring and add a little bit of orange? Urs is saying, I think taking the labels off is always a good thing. Yes, I think I have my moments. I have my moments of absolutely needing to know what colour it is I'm using, and I have some moments of going, oh, do you know what? Should we just do it by eye and crack on with it? We need to add a lot more white to that, I think. So see how horrible I am to my SAA brushes, and they stand up to it, rattling this brush around in a very tiny pan. And I know some of you out there will be going, yes, but Ali, you told us to buy full pans, not little tiny ones. I use little tiny ones for this because I don't need so much colour, that's why. Now there's nothing like testing this colour out on your paper because gouache does dry ever so slightly differently. And because I'm going to do a little bit of a watercolour effect to it too, I need to let it out, I need to blend it out a little bit. I don't think that's quite pale enough the zinc white isn't working, so I'm going to pastelize it a little bit, I'm sure that's not a word, with some permanent white, so you can see the makeup of it changes really quite dramatically. Let's go back with this and see if we get, that's better. That's better. Might not look very different in the camera, but I promise you that is a much better colour. It hasn't got that kind of heat to it that it had before. So need to just rearrange my stuff so that I need to turn my palette around so that it's not a million miles away. There we go. And we need to bring painting back in. Now let's start with the first few layers. I'm going to pick up some of my colour on my brush. I'm looking, although you can't see it, I do have my reference material up on the screen just below where you're all chatting to me so that I can keep an eye on all of you. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my number 6 brush to add a little bit of colour to that toadstool. Don't want to do it all over. Brush is going back in the water. Now I've got my kitchen roll just under my water pot today because I've got 20 things in my hand. And I'm going to use my brush to smudge out that gouache. Now I personally think that gouache is a little bit closer to pastel than it is to watercolour because it is incredibly blendable and really quite chalky in the grand scheme of things. I don't mean in its consistency, I mean in the way that you can kind of smudge it around, and I could come back to this in a year's time and that would still be very blendable. So I tend to think of it in those terms as opposed to being close to watercolour. Trudy is asking a question. Ali, did you mean pastelize as in make more pastel, or does it become powdery? I know that sounds like an odd question. No, it's not an odd question at all, Trudy. Pastelize as in the colour. So to make it more like a pastel version. Zinc white will make your colours paler, and permanent white will make them kind of like an ice creamy kind of colour. Do you know what I mean? That sort of... I don't know, I'm trying to think of the vocabulary to describe it. Much more based on white as opposed to being a paler colour. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, do feel free to comment and say, Ali, what you're talking about. And then I'll try to re-describe it for you. Thank you for asking the question. It's nice to have people in the room double checking what on earth it is that I'm going on about. Because most of the time, I don't know. Now here, look, we've got that mismatch of tone going on, 2 very even tones happening there. So I'm going to need to do something about those at some point, okay? I can't do that at the moment. I have a feeling I'm going to need to make the green darker, maybe. Not sure, but I'll worry about that in a little bit. Now let's do these 2 down here. Now this one's got a great big green blob on it, which we can get rid of, and I can tidy up some of the other elements. So I'm putting that colour in, taking the excess water off, and then using my brush to smudge it around. That green really doesn't want to go. We'll take care of that by dabbing a little bit of extra gouache over the top. That might take a couple of goes at getting rid of it. Let's show you what everything looks like in the close-up camera so you can see it in a little more detail. The close-up camera looks a little bit brighter than the actual painting, but you kind of get the drift. Actually, let's leave it in the close-up camera because I think that is more helpful. Now I'm going to put this colour on this particular toadstool. It's actually much darker than that, but we can get to sorting out the tones a little bit later. And in my head was going, oh, this doesn't look good, this doesn't look good. Do you know why I think it doesn't look good? It doesn't look good because I've done 4 of them and my head is going, we can't have an even number of them that you're working on. So I'm going to pop this little one in the background too. So we're going to be working on those 5 today to make them look realistic. Obviously, if I was working on this painting in normal circumstances, I would block in everything all at the same time. So I'm going to go back over to my palette again while that dries to mix up a selection of other colours to address some of the tones that are on that toadstool. Now, I didn't mix these up in preparation for today's demonstration. These are actually mixed up for something else that I am working on at the moment. But it just so happens that they might be terribly useful. So I'm going to re-wet some of these. And another, look at that, fabulous thing about gouache. I must have mixed these on here a good 2 months ago, and a little bit of water reconstitutes it because they are quality gouache paints. There's a whole selection going on here. I've got majority of the gouache that I use is De La Rowney, just because I really like it. I like the consistency of it. I've got a little bit of Winsor & Newton in here as well. They do some unusual colours. I've got a bit of Pebeo gouache going on in here too, because some of the colours that they produce are different again still. So just like my watercolours, I don't tend to stick to one of them. Now, what I don't particularly have is a sort of ready orange. So what I'm actually going to do to prove that this is seriously a mixed media piece is I'm going to go back. Why am I holding those brushes when I don't need them? I'm going to go back to my watercolour palette, and I'm going to find a red that I think is going to work for this. Now, as dark, I really want an orangey red, which I don't have in my palette. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for a reddy brown. I think, no, I don't think I know. This is Daniel Smith Lunar Red Rock. So I'm going to take a brush full of that. I'm going to stick it somewhere else on my palette. Is that Lunar Red Rock or is that Hematite Violet? Oh, it could be any of them. No, it's Lunar Red Rock. I'm going to pop that over there. That's kind of got a nice warm quality to it. Get rid of my watercolour palette. So you can see this is as much about colour mixing as it is about how to paint a fungi. Now I'm going to take one of my oranges. Let's take this orange here. And sometimes the things that a painting is not designed to be completed. A painting is not designed to go, oh yes, I'm going to stick this in this exhibition. A painting is there to help you to learn more about something else. And today it's learning more about colour mixing. Let's go for this orange. You can see with gouache it matters a lot less because of its opacity. You can actually throw more colours into your mix. And you won't get mud like you will do if you were doing this in watercolour. That's better. That's kind of more what I had in mind. And then we'll take some of that colour, we'll move that elsewhere. We'll add a bit more orange to it. Let's make it, I really want that orange in there, I think. I think I've got some over here actually. Let's pick some of this up because it's a nice consistency already. And stick that in there. That's better. And we'll brighten it up just ever so slightly with a little bit of that permanent white. So again, palette's going back down here. Where's my painting gone? Threw it to one side, couldn't find it. Let's start with that kind of paler orangey colour. And let's start with this one. So I'm going to add some of the orange back into that. To start looking, oh, we need to be in close-up camera, don't we? To start looking at the shape, excuse me, on this fungi. So we can start to blend that in, get that nice and smudged in. That's working quite well. And then we can go up to the tip of it and we can add that deeper colour because we've got a nice gradation going between one colour and the next. So I can get that going in. It's looking okay. Background, maybe not dark enough at the moment, but that's okay. I'm going to pop back over to my palette and I'm going to pick up some richer brown to pop just at the top of my fungi. I've got a little bit of wet into wet going on there. And I'm also going to start thinking about where there are shadows and highlights on my fungi too. And I'm going to switch to a smaller brush to get right in there to start smudging in some of that colour. So we've got a little bit of darkness going on, we've got a little bit of light going on. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go straight into the permanent white because there are some little kind of shining elements where some of these fungi are wet, and I want to get that in. I can also add a little bit of extra white to the edge of my fungi, or I can reclaim some of those edges if I want to. So very easy to sculpt, very easy to smudge around on your painting. I'm using a bit of a dotting method now to get that in. It needs some definition on the edge, but I'm going to come to that in a second. What I want to work on now is the stem, and I want the stem to be in shadow coming down underneath to kind of blend in with those textures that we had before. So I'm reaching back over to my gouache, but I'm going for a dark brown now. I'm going for a kind of burnt umber style of colour. I have a feeling that it's not going to be deep or dark enough, but that's okay. I can alter that later. Now I have the opportunity here to do a little bit of texturizing at the top of my fungi stem to give the illusion that the edge of that fungi, of the cap of it, isn't flat. So I've worked that colour kind of negatively back in to the top of my toadstool. Looking back at my reference material, I can see that the dark comes down into there. Washing my brush out again and using the damp version of it to pull that colour down the stem so you get a nice graded look to it. Now it goes a bit orangey again on the stem, so I'm tipping my brush back into some of those oranges that I mixed up before and adding those colours back in. We can do some detailing on the stem in terms of texture. Afterwards we can kind of do that at the end if we need to, but for the time being I'm going to pull that colour down into my watercolour, and then I'm going to re-wet my watercolour so that I'm smudging it with my brush, so that rather than it ending terribly abruptly at the bottom, it's kind of melding in with its surroundings. There we go. And then it's kind of just emerging. Okay. Urs is saying, this is showing me how essential it is to get the right sized brush for the task. Yes. Sometimes I think impressionistic painters like myself, we shy away from a detailed brush. And I have had to give myself a stiff talking to recently to say, Ali, just because you're an impressionistic painter doesn't mean that you have to not use small brushes. I admit that there are times when I have said to people that I am teaching, don't use too small a brush, but I usually say that because they're faffers, serial faffers, and I have to crack it out of them. But for this, because like I said, we're crossing between the elements of fine art and illustration, I can use whatever brush I like. And anyway, don't listen to anything any of us have got to say about it. Do what you have to do. Do what you have to do. That's what being creative is all about, doing what you have to do. Right, I'm going to be a bit daring. Who knew? I'm going to go back to my watercolour box and I'm going to pick out a red. I'm going for this one, which is actually quinacridone red. Not quinacridone magenta, quinacridone red. And I'm going to mix a little thin layer of that on the palette just to my right, so that it's kind of got no real substance to it at all. This is just a glaze, because here and there on this fungi you've got a sort of peachy kind of reddish tinge to it that I want to replicate. So where this gouache is wet, the watercolour is spreading out on the surface of it and providing a little bit of a glaze. That's better. What are people saying? Heather is saying, I've learnt to ignore numbers and look at the head of the brushes. They're all different. Yes, Heather is absolutely right. Brush sizes are only relative to the range that they are in. So I've got size 4 brushes, which are massive, and I've got size 4 brushes, which are tiny. So yes, Heather, you're absolutely right. You go, yeah, that'll do. That'll do. And oh, bless you, Christine. Christine's saying masterclass of working with colour. Thank you very much indeed. That's very kind of you. Now, let's do another couple of those. We'll repeat the exercise, shall we? To get another couple of those correct. All I've got to do is remember what I did. Let's do this one. A bit of orange going in. That's what we did, wasn't it? So a bit of that orange going in, and then back into the water. I'm going to stick my hand in there because the camera is reading it a little bit brightly. Pulling that down into there, going in with, what did I do next? A bit of this, a bit of the slightly deeper colour to get a richer area around on elements of the fungi. And coming in around and down there. But as we know, it's all about the stem. So I'm going to go in with that dark brown, and oh, it's dried up under the lights. It's completely dried up. Isn't that funny? Now, this that I'm about to do is, I don't know if you can see, but you've got little drops of water on the ferrule of the brush. And what will happen is if I allow those to leave, they will fall down into the bristles and they will mess up the consistency of the paint. So I'm going to take that water off so that I am in control of it and not the other way around. This is what I say about painting. You have to give it a stiff talking to, wrestle it to the ground, and show it who's boss. So we'll bring that colour down in. We'll use the water to smudge that colour. Maybe I need that a little bit further actually. Smudge that colour down into the stem, and then we'll go to the orange that I pre-mixed over here to give that a little bit of warmth. Now I'm painting negatively around the toadstool. Oh, I haven't done a very good job of that. Negatively around the toadstool that is just below it, so that the cap of it shows up. Can you see that? And then going back in with our little bit of quinacridone red to give it that kind of blush to the top of it, and maybe a bit of white, but I think it's all swimming at the moment. Now Carol is saying, I only have a cheap pack of 6 gouache colours, so when I attempt this, it will really be a challenging colour mixing. Yeah, completely understand where you're coming from, Carol. Until you discover whether you really like a medium or not, then you don't necessarily want the expense of buying a lot of colours. As we know, you do get what you pay for. So if, Carol, when you have a go at doing it, you don't get disheartened by your colours, is what I'm saying. Because if they are really cheap, then they're not necessarily going to do what it is that you want them to do. So don't blame yourself, in other words. I have lost count of the number of times where people have said, oh, this isn't working, I'm a rubbish painter, XYZ. And that's not necessarily true. Sometimes actually your materials can let you down in a big way. So don't always automatically assume. Admittedly, there is the whole kind of bad work woman blames her tools type of scenario. But I can tell you in paint that you get what you pay for. So dotting my colour in here. In the photograph, actually, this is a bit redder, but I don't want it to detract from what's going on above. So we'll crack on with this. Trudy is putting, knowing that I fight with acrylics, it's heartwarming that you give your watercolours a talking to. Oh, yes, of course I do. Of course I do. I give a lot of inanimate objects talking to. I give a lot of animals in my life a talking to as well. So effectively, that is how I roll in the studio on a daily basis. So let's get this one in. We've got that kind of nice, we've got a darker collar on this one, which I can smudge up into the rest of it. And then actually where it gets to the frill of it, I'm going to leave it alone because I'm going to work that back in the stem. So I've got a little bit of that pinky blush going in. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this, can't you? It's not the neatest and tidiest at the moment. I'm going to use my Posca pen. If you can hang on with me just for another few moments. I'm going to work back in with a Posca pen so that you can see me tidying some of these elements up. These demonstrations always take longer than I think they're going to, which is lovely because it means I get to talk to you about the nitty-gritty of stuff. But I never managed to cram in as much as I would like. Anne is saying, I found my whole art improved enormously when I used decent paint brushes and paper. Yeah, and to be honest, you can even narrow it down further than that. I've lost count of the number of times where someone has come to a watercolour beginners class, for example, and I haven't changed their brushes and I haven't changed their paint. What I do is I give them a decent piece of Saunders Waterford paper, and the look of joy on their faces when they realise that it's not them is quite something else. Right, let's give that a quick dry. Alice is saying, glad to see I'm not the only one who gives plants, animals, etc. talking to. Yeah, I mean, it's not like everyone is at the end of my wrath. I give myself a good talking to as well on a very regular basis. Carol is saying, a bit like paper, as a beginner, I soon found cheap paper wasn't doing me any favours. I'm hooked now, so my supplies are increasing both in quantity and quality. Yeah, I mean, if you are new to art, it's not very long before you need to purchase everything, is it? Right, Posca pens, acrylic paint markers, water soluble when they're wet, waterproof when they are dry, which means that they are fantastic for this kind of work because you can work back into your painting with your Posca pen to add detail. And then what you can do is you can take a damp brush to them and you can smudge them in with the rest of your paint so they look more like paint and less like a pen, which is no bad thing. Urs is saying, might have known your dryer would be purple. Of course, Urs, you know me well enough by now, my lovely. Of course it is. My other one, my spare one, is bright pink. It's Ali Hargreaves pink is what it is. So I'm using a little bit of Posca to smudge some. I came across a little blob of green in there and actually managed to reconstitute it so that I can get it back to being a nice smooth finish again. And into that, what I'm going to do, because we are running out of time this morning and I am grateful for all of your attention, I'm going to use a little bit of white gouache to go back in and describe sort of some of the texture that you get in the stems of toadstools. So I'm flashing my brush up and down the stem to kind of give it that texture. It looks rubbish when it hits the top, but what you do is wash your brush out, give it a dry off, and smudge those ends into the surrounding colour so that you get a nice blendable version out. And then to finish up, this isn't as much as I wanted to get to, but one of the things that I wanted to show you was from the overhead. You can see that's much more like the actual colour of it. I wanted to show you a bit of tonal balancing with some negative painting. So I've got a problem in here that this tone and this tone are very similar indeed. So I need to go back into my background and address that problem. So to do that, just over in my, I'm just wrestling with my watercolour box. I need my green Apatite Genuine pan that I had originally for doing the background. And I'm going to turn my painting on its side. And I mean, I probably should do this with a bigger brush, but never mind, I haven't got one. So it's this or nothing. It's this or my fingers, effectively. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in with a much darker green, painting negatively around part of my toadstool, bringing that down in and working back around this section of toadstool too. When you do this, if you do this, you need to push this colour far further than you want it to go because you don't want to end up with a halo around your toadstools. So to blend it into the surroundings, I actually need to pull and push that colour higher up and further away than you might expect. But look what happens when you bring it back again. suddenly, ba-ding, toadstools, that's the official noise of this fungi painting. The toadstools have suddenly kind of started to come to life. I can start messing around with the how that it works. Oh, for goodness sake, Ali, how that works in the background. So you can see I'm working much further away from my toadstool than I actually needed it to be, but I'm sort of blending it into the background. And I also need to do that in the gap in between, which actually, serendipity, this probably is the right size brush. So working back in. Lots of people saying, ooh, paper bag, please. Just in case you're wondering what it is that they mean, I say, don't I, that sometimes you've just got to crack on with it, and maybe you need a brown paper bag to breathe in to when you do it. And yes, you do need to kind of crack on with it. Sometimes I think we're far too afraid of colour. You see, look at that now. So much better. So much better. I could have been possibly braver with my background colour when I put it in, but it didn't really know. And does it really matter is the answer, or the question even. Does it really matter that I have to go back in and rebalance my tones? Of course it doesn't. Why would it matter? Then I can go back into there. I need to pull that colour down a little bit. It's reacting with the textures in the background. Lots of people holding their breath. Please don't hold your breath on my account. And over here, I'm going to deepen this part of it so that we get that stem showing up. And I'm going to pull that dark colour over to one side, and possibly need to do a little bit of extra. I'm on a roll now. A little bit of extra over here. I don't want to, I like this bit under here. Don't want to alter that. So let's just do the top part of it and get that in. If you're wondering why the colour is kind of reacting differently, it's where it's hitting all of those delicious textures on the background. So I'm not creating that. That's just where the Green Apatite Genuine is falling into some of those textures that we put on. There we go, that's better. Quick dry, quick dry. You dry it better than that, obviously. Then I can go back in with some white, which you could do in Posca pen if you wanted to. You could do with gel pen, you could do with a pastel, any of those things. I'm choosing to do it in gouache just because I like the way that gouache kind of blends. And now I can work on a few of those highlights on the fungi to kind of get a sense of the texture going on. We can, ooh, I know what we can do. Hold on, I need to put this in. I said I was going to finish, I'm not. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of that permanent white gouache, and I'm going to add a little bit of the cobalt blue that I spattered into the background of this. This is my brand of cobalt blue, Watercolors. So I'm going to take a little bit of that. I don't need a lot. Into the white, because sometimes if you want something to look like a highlight, blue is more effective than white, particularly as we're working on kind of warm colours on our toadstools. So we'll get a little bit of that going on. We do need white as well, it's not exclusive, but if I blend those together in a second, you will see what I'm going on about. So we'll get this, we can tidy up the shape of that fungi as well. We can tidy up the shape of it over here. So yes, I am being fantastically picky with my toadstool, but I can be now. I've done all the impressionistic stuff. I've done all the throwing the colour at it and, you know, being brave and texturizing it and all of that kind of stuff. Now I get to do the nitty gritty. Now I get to pull it all together with as much or as little detail as I require. So I'm going to dot that colour in, and then to finish off my numbered, I've sort of kind of abandoned these, haven't I? We're concentrating on this because we used a dark colour in here, I can also afford to use a dark colour for some of my shadows. I can also afford to use a dark colour because we are crossing the boundary from fine art into illustration. And I can also afford to use a dark colour because I want to. It's my painting and I do what I like with it. So up into here, I've got black, a little tiny touch of it, to deepen the shadow underneath that toadstool, kind of quite fine in there, just to deepen that, make it look a little more three-dimensional. I can also use a few little stripes of that into the texture of my fungi to make that pop forward as well. And hopefully you agree that if I had, you know, if you were able to stay with me all day today, you would see me work on all of these, but actually I've pulled that little section together and now that is looking more complete. So if we look at that in isolation from the rest of it, hopefully you'll agree that by some detailing, by some gouache, by some careful colour mixing, I'm sorry, I've just got to add another highlight. With some careful colour mixing, we have started to make these fungi really kind of pop off the surface. That's better. There we go. Okay, so I'm not going to have time, sadly, to finish this painting because I've got a million other projects, as I always do, on the go. But this will prove to be quite a nice... some of the paintings I don't ever finish because they prove to be quite useful to me when we talk about other things. Or if we're talking about... What tends to happen is, certainly in my job, you either see the beginning of a painting or you see the end of a painting. You don't get to see the middle part of it. And when I go and demonstrate for art societies and clubs and things, it's nice to take a really kind of half-finished piece of work with me to do what I've just done with you this morning, to kind of build it up and work it up. Now, why am I so busy this week? I am so busy this week because I am back up at SAA HQ. I'm actually there on Thursday with a secret project that I can't tell you about, but I'm there on Friday as well. I know some of you in the room will actually be joining me for that. There is a link to this workshop if you can't attend in person in the comments of the live Facebook chat, but I'll put it elsewhere on the Learning to Paint blog and on YouTube as well. I'm doing Rufus Fox. So this is as mixed media as it gets. This is watercolor and brusho and pastel and all of those kind of things. So if you are going to join me either in person or online on the day, particularly if you're joining in online, then don't forget to say hello and pop up and wave and send me all your questions, because whilst I have the workshop people in front of me, I'm also very aware that I have a live audience as well, just like you are today. I hope you enjoyed that project. There's more information to be had over on www.learningtopaint.co.uk. Just pop over to the resources part of the website and you will find the Technique Tuesday blog. If you have come in just today and you are thinking, well, what is she talking about with her needle felting wool and her skeleton leaves and all of that kind of stuff, you'll be able to catch up on all of those projects all the way through. Chances are we're going to start a new one next Tuesday. I'm not going to give you that information. You're going to have to tune in and find out. But take care of yourselves this week, won't you? Stay out of the sun or the rain or the snow or whatever it is that you are currently enduring. I've got some All Aboard Artists sessions to host tonight and tomorrow. And then, like I said, I'm back up with the SAA, which I'm looking forward to hugely. Hopefully a little bit of a weekend off, and then we start August with a vengeance, and there's going to be some big announcements coming. But until I see you either online or in person, take care of yourselves, won't you? And we'll catch up very soon. Bye, lovely people. Bye.